Let's talk about crushing chaos and making their forces accept their impending doom like it's 1993. Warhammer 40k Boltgun is a Doom or Duke Nukem-like retro throwback game that is based in the grim darkness of the far future. But it's kinda Doom-based, but not really. We'll talk about it later. You play as the Ultramarine Stuttgart veteran, Malum Cato, a Space Marine based off of the Sternguard's Veterans Kit, with you being able to make an almost identical model to the one in games if you own that kit. From the advertisements, Warhammer 40k Boltgun hopes to be a throwback game that, while not reinventing the wheel, would be the same sort of niche of things like Dusk or the ever-beautiful masterpiece that is Ultra Kill. The game really tries to show its throwback nature through the retro FPS graphics. They also have some throwbacks to things that 40k had during the time of the 1990s, or to sound completely stupid, the late 1900s. First off is the helmet that Malum Cato wears. This helmet, usually lovingly called the Beaky helmet, is an old school classic. This was the original helmet design for Space Marines, with them having these funny cone-shaped face masks. The Ultramarines also, for the longest time, and basically right now, are the main faction of Space Marines, with the Ultramarines usually being the protagonists in video games for how versatile they are in combat. They've even been made fun of because they just didn't lose battles for a long time in the lore, where they were just these shining golden gods that could do nothing possibly wrong until the Tyranids showed up and ate them all. Malum Cato also uses a bolter that comes from the proverbial Bronze Age, with it being a pattern of bolt gun that was used very early on too, including the old color scheme. This is just something that hopefully showcases the quality of the game, by having insane attention to detail like this. I want to get his model off of the Sternguard veteran kit so I can kiss his little handsome emperor-worshipping helmet. What a handsome dude. Now, I know that people are calling Boltgun a Doom game, and it kinda is, but it's something else at the same time. Let's have a quick edutainment talk about the Doom engine and the build engine. The Doom engine is classic, we all know it. It's a modification of the Wolfenstein 3D engine, the fake 3D, making it so the game really only works off of a 2D plane with no actual height to the game. There are things like fake walls and doors that can change the layout along with empty space for a level, but most of it was based off of a grid system. Although Doom is more advanced, it still pretty much works off the same framework, with height only being visual, with the game not really recognizing any sort of differences in height. It also made it so there could be no entities above you or below you. You're just kind of a big solid cylinder going all the way up to space, with enemies homing in on where your camera is. In fact, in the first Doom, you can only look left and right. The enemies and entities in the game are all flat and rotate with you, with them being sprites. So that sounds like Boltgun, right? Wrong! The build engine does everything that Doom does, but you can move vertically with multiple levels of movement, with things like jumping in multiple leveled buildings. But a build engine game sounds like what Minecraft is built off of instead of the Doom engine. Nevertheless, calling this game Doom-like or a retro shooter is much more instantly recognizable, so I can get why people call it that. In the release cycle of Boltgun, it was promised to be a throwback game in ads, one that would both celebrate the Warhammer lore old and new, with it being a fun retro shooter. In the year of 2022, most of the 40k games that came out during the time were kind of meh, or were at least received as meh by most audiences. Some parts of those games were amazing, while other parts made the game feel almost unplayable. Could a quaint little homage to older times be what the Warhammer community wants? Would it impress reviewers? And most of all, is Boltgun good? The visuals of Boltgun are a throwback to an older type of gaming, where color palette limitations were based completely on hardware, with some computers at the very start only being able to have a total of 8 colors. Some games that are throwback to more retro gaming do the exact same thing, where they have a limited palette, like Shovel Knight or Ultra Kill. Well, they do still slightly bend the rules, because computers now are much better than the ones we used in the 90s. At least I hope they are. The game does this pretty masterfully, and showcases its inspirations for design, when the last room of the first stage is a recreation of the starting room of E1M1 in the original Doom. There are even settings to make the game less or more pixelated, and changing the limited color palette to include more or less color. Although it doesn't really matter, inclusions like this really do help showcase the developer's dedication towards the art style. It isn't groundbreaking, but they do nail the style very well. Things like particles look great in this game, with a personal favorite of mine being the Kraken Bolter and other bullet trails. It makes the game look a little psychedelic, which is so frickin' rad, especially when you're fighting the likes of Tzeentch and Nurgle. The sound design is equally artistically bit-crushed and invigorating. For a showcase of how fun it is to shoot, look at the namesake of the game, the bolt gun. Listen to this thing rumble. The gun itself sounds angry. This sort of design goes for the things you fight too. The Reaper autocannon that rattles the battlefield and eardrums as it roars out from Chaos Terminator sounds great too. While the sounds of Nurglings and Screechers giggle and yell. Greater demons like Great Unclean Ones and Lords of Fate send out these very iconic sounds when they expel bodily fluids or energy at you. With the sound you'll hear the most, maybe besides the bolter, being one of my personal favorites, which is the sound of your Sternguard veteran hauling himself at max speed at whatever he may be fighting. To quote one of the Warhammer 40k books, "Nothing human-shaped should be that fast, so lithe, so powerful, especially not anything in excess of 2 meters tall and carrying more armor than 4 normal men could lift." The game makes you feel like you are a freight train made out of the Imperium's might. The sound of the ground barely being able to handle you, with your miniature earthquakes happening, makes the player really feel like Batman. I mean a space marine. I'm gonna keep it a buck with you. There were very few times where I got to focus on the soundtrack while playing. It was more a very fun layer of added background noise that helped keep the feeling of fast-paced action in my blood. Though I did not find myself headbanging or shooting to the beat, or for the music to be all that adaptive, there was only one time where I really noticed anything while I was trekking across a canyon after getting a key. I took note of a few measures of a song that I thought were very interesting sounding. If you want a game that has an amazing soundtrack for the 40k universe, you can look elsewhere. Darktide and Mechanicus have some of those best masterful soundtracks with their understanding of what Warhammer 40k can have for soundtracks. Adding lots of motifs that are both synthetic and religious at the same time, like church organs and chanting. My main hope is that when the official soundtrack comes out for this game, I'll fall in love with it, with me being able to really get to chew on some of those sounds, instead of having to hear them through screams and bolter fire. For accessibility, the game can run on most, if not all, computers, with the recommended requirements for the graphics card being a 780 Ti with 8GB of RAM, and a 64-bit operating system. So if you got your computer in the closer part of the end of last decade, you should be fine. The game on my super-powered toaster oven that can run Darktide has no issues. And there was only one bug I encountered in my 10 hours of playtime. This is where my character got stuck in an elevator, then glitching out of the map. With that, I was able to reload to about 3 minutes before that issue happened, and it didn't happen again. With me only losing about 3 minutes of my time, it really wasn't that big of an issue, and the game runs exceedingly well for me, and it still has some graphical options for those who might want to make sure their computers don't combust. For gameplay, Boltgun is a very tight and fun to play game. Each act of the game kind of reminds me a lot of the different episodes of Doom, where you're given your starting weapon and told to find everything else, allowing for different styles of play for each of the episodes, like the plasma gun not even being given until near the middle section of the last part of the game. So you get slower each level, like you being given a magazine of a Kraken bolter, power-ups, or complete health, ammo, or shield refills. One of my issues with the game is that there's no real way to look at the whole map. This would really help because of a large amount of pretty samey looking spaces in the game. Doom has the same issue, at least partially, and in Doom finding the auto map is a godsend. I don't like being stuck in these environments even if they do look very awesome and accurate to the lore. So maybe make it so the servo skull that's following you around can pull up a map for you? I don't know. The difficulty is one thing that ramps up pretty crazily in this game. Bosses on some levels become normal enemies, things like plague toads and flamers are pretty chill, until you have to deal with a bunch of them or the exalted versions. Aspiring champions, besides the main boss at the end of each segment, is probably the thing that killed me the most in the game, with me also hating hit scan abilities like the ones that the Sorcerer and the Lord of Fate have, as well as the plague toad's tongue attack and the aspiring champion's speed and melee. They leave me kind of miffed. On the second hardest difficulty, I started taking a lot of deaths, especially on the final level of Act 2, where there are not enough ammo and shield pickups for that area, where the first act kind of feels like a stroll in the park compared to later acts. But it does a great job of capturing the emotion of being a single man fighting against insurmountable odds. The story of the game is actually a pseudo-sequel to the Space Marine game, where the MacGuffin your guy has to go get is a piece of the power source that Inquisitor Drogon had. You are sent planetside to go get it, and then back up to the spaceship you were originally on to stop a Chaos Sorcerer in a final confrontation. This game's story, like the rest of its design, takes a cue from the person who made the original engine for Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, and Quake. On the issue of story in game, John Carmack has been quoted saying, "Story in a video game is like story in an adult film. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important. That incredibly smart man never thought that things like The Last of Us were going to become big." So is he really that smart? Yes, he's insanely smart. That being said, the game does have one obvious inconsistency to it for the lore though. A single Space Marine would have issues and or die to one Terminator. Our character fights against greater demons and a small army of the Black Legion and comes out the other side alive and with his mission completed. While this isn't exactly correct for the lore, the way you fight everything does make you really feel like a Space Marine, really getting that power fantasy. The game overall is quite replayable, with there not only being multiple difficulties you can go through, as well as hunting for secrets found around different maps. And you even get cool little stickers on the level select screen for them when you finish them. The game seemingly also teases the inclusion of more characters with different perks compared to the generalist Ultramarine. I know this is more a wish list than anything, but I would love to see a melee-focused Blood Angel and maybe a Salamander. Being able to see some of those beautiful pixelated particle effects that this game already does so well coming out of a heavy or normal flamer in action would be pretty baller. Before I get to my own scoring for the game, let's see what those know-it-all games journalists had to say. Did you know they get to play games early, and the reviews aren't even that good or deep? No one who got it early is going to make a 10-hour video essay on how this game works. They're just going to tell you if it's good or not. Fun fact, most games are not Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, and they never will be. Or will they ever want to be in the first place? Much like how everything was either Dark Souls or some variation of Skyrim, we are now comparing everything to the new Legend of Zeldas. Despite all my bashing, the journalists did kinda get this one right, voicing very similar concerns overall, as if they were a hive mind of writers that used ChatGPT, giving it a 7 out of 10 on most points, saying that the game's a bit too repetitive, or the areas all look the same. But have you seen most other boomer shooters? That's just kinda part of the genre. As for me, I really did like the true throwback game to the retro shooter genre that limited itself to some of the older ideas, rather than being inspired by the new retro shooters like Ultra Kill or the reinvention of the boomer shooter genre in the new Doom games. The game is kind of archaic, with you mostly having to rely on arena pickups for health armor and ammo, but that's kind of part of the charm of it. It feels like a portal back to the past, unapologetically. I would recommend the game to anyone who wants to give it a try. It's a good game that doesn't do anything new, but the things that it does very well. Which is fine, innovation only comes every once in a while. For its price tag of $20 US and a playtime of about 10 hours, I would say Boltgun is worth your money. I give it an 8 out of 10. AK, yeah, it's pretty darn good. So what do you guys think of Boltgun? Have you played it? I would love to hear from people who both liked and disliked the game, and maybe some people in the middle. Either way, your opinion is treasured here and I love discussion. What did you guys think of my review? Did it hit? Did it flop? Do you want to see me review more 40k games and cover Boltgun a bit more? Make sure to tell me in the comments down below. That's all I got for now. Till next video, fellas.